So Rosie, you've been working with us on the La Palma eruption. What's your feeling on how science communication has been handled, and specifically Twitter, because Twitter is what you've been looking at? Give us a little sense of what you've seen on how people have been talking about this eruption on Twitter.
I think what is very clear is that science communication in this current situation is incredibly important, especially reporting accurately, especially on social media platforms such as Twitter, that are great in that they give everyone a voice, so that it means that local kind of stories on the ground and also the scientists have a platform that they can communicate on. But it also kind of gives rise to anyone to be able to have an opinion. So kind of what was very clear in the early days of the eruption is that it was great because it meant that information on the eruption was able to be, put out there instantly. We kind of live in a 24-hour news cycle where people want, accurate news straight away, and especially in a volcanic situation that is so dynamic. So it's kind of great in the early days that it kind of gave everyone a voice, but what became increasingly clear is the importance of that kind of accurate reporting, especially with all like stories of landslides and kind of information being taken completely out of context. So I think as the eruptions kind of evolved, it's been incredibly interesting to see how social media, particularly Twitter, has been utilised by institutions, the scientists, the public, the media, and I think it's been utilised in very different ways based on who is reporting.
So what are the dangers, the pitfalls of everybody being able to use Twitter?
I think the pitfall is that it gives anyone an opinion, and whether or not you have a degree in volcanology, it gives you the ability to be able to speak up and share your opinion on the science, even though you might not be the expert on the science. So it kind of has led to what I've seen. It has led at times to kind of conspiracy theories and kind of things being blown completely out of proportion, and that information then gets retweeted and kind of can blow up, and then the local people that are kind of living through this, that's the information that they then receive, and it's it's been taken completely out of context, but nowhere in between has it been explained how it's been taken out of context. So it's almost taken at face value, and therefore inaccurate information has kind of gone out there during the eruption. It has led to a bit of hysteria. I recently saw a lot of tweets saying that the eruption was going to end, and it's so unfair on the people that are living through this to then have to read that on social media and think it's finally coming to an end, and to then be told, no, it's still ongoing, this is the actual science, there's no scientific kind of signal that it is ending. So I think that is a pitfall, kind of false information getting out to the local people who are living through this.
So of course it's a dramatic scenario, but we can't say this is absolutely what's happening, and there's a more subtle messaging is what needs to happen, but that's difficult, isn't it, because that's not very newsworthy.
Yeah, so it's very easy to kind of want the headlines in this kind of situation. It's very kind of easy to get caught up in the science, the excitement of the situation on the ground. So yeah, it's quite, if you just put out seismic activity or gas measurements onto Twitter, then it's not very exciting for the media who are involved. It's not very exciting for people who are watching kind of internationally. So information will kind of blow up on social media that is more newsworthy, and you can get a headline out of it. You can pull on people's heartstrings, emotions. So I think all of that kind of getting tangled up into it on social media has been incredibly interesting to see unfold.
But not very fair on locals who are going through it day by day.
No, not at all. It's incredibly unfair on locals, kind of, if that's their one source of information, kind of going onto Twitter to see immediate kind of reporting on the eruption. If that's then taken out of context and it gives them a false sense of hope or maybe a false sense of security in the eruption, it's totally unfair on them.
Yeah, and how helpful is it to have really close-up images of this lava jet flying up and the feeling that the whole island is in flames, and that's not actually the case? How helpful is that?
So it's not very helpful to have really kind of close-up, zoomed-in images of the eruption, because it kind of sends out a message internationally to those people who aren't on the ground or maybe aren't familiar with the island of La Palma, that it is the entire island that is kind of in this kind of disaster zone. It's almost like Dante's Peak, the images that they're kind of putting out there, and if you kind of zoom in, you just everything that's on the periphery. Kind of when we arrived, life was going on at normal in the port. There's other parts of the island that aren't as affected. So kind of those zoomed in images kind of on Twitter that I've seen kind of paint this kind of disaster scenario, like almost like a disaster movie that's going on. I think it's quite inaccurate to report that way, so you need the whole picture, not just a zoomed in version.
So, if you're an international institution, Rosie, using Twitter, what's your responsibility?
The main responsibility of international institutions on Twitter, I think, is to get out the most accurate information to the local people, because that is, I guess, their source of information, especially in this eruption. It's been so unique. So they have an incredible responsibility to accurately report on the eruption. If that also involves including images of what is going on to better explain, especially when there's a lot of scientific terms involved, I think it's a great responsibility because there's so much to report on and you only have a limited amount of characters. So in order to accurately use the correct terms with a lot of imagery, in order to explain it to the local people, I think it's a big responsibility of institutions to use Twitter responsibly.
So if you've created more confusion with something you've tweeted, is it your responsibility to put it right?
I think it is the responsibility of the institutions to put right any confusion, because it's human nature in that type of situation where everything's so immediate and dynamic that it's very easy to get caught up in that and report on something maybe not in the best possible terms if you try to explain it to lay people. So I think going back to Twitter and re-explaining what you've already put out there in like a much better way, a more articulate way, a more calm way, instead of in that situation, in that moment, I think it is their responsibility to do that.
So not to use Twitter just to get followers.
So institutions shouldn't just use Twitter to grab followers, to have an audience, to have as many likes, to get a story out there. That's not their position. Arguably that's the position of the media. As scientists and scientific institutions, it's their responsibility only to want to put out accurate information, not to build their follower count in this type of situation.
So are there any tweets out there that you've seen shouldn't be in, what have they done that they shouldn't have done, basically? Have you seen any specific examples of this?
So there have been examples of some institutions kind of, I guess, using the wrong terminology in that situation whilst tweeting. More recently, when the eruption was upgraded to a VEI3, what was quite interesting that in the comment section of those tweets, there was a lot of confusion about what VEI is. Not everyone is a volcanologist, not everyone knows what that means. What does it mean to be a VEI3 eruption? And I think it kind of created a lot of almost scaremongering because, to people who are living through this, that can be quite a scary thing if you don't know what it means. So I think that's a more recent example where I think there could have been more done to explain what it means, why it was upgraded, what it means for the people living through this.
So what does VEI3 mean? Why was it upgraded? Just because there was more ash, or because it was more lava, or?
So it was, from my understanding, upgraded to VEI3 because there was a bigger quantity of ash. So it's a measure of the intensity of the eruption. So it's not necessarily that it's more dangerous for the people on the ground, and I think that is the message that I perhaps sent out. But it's just a way to kind of categorise an eruption, and it's more something for the scientific community than the people on the ground. But I think the message that I sent out was, a worrying message for the people that don't understand what that is, and you need to kind of use these platforms to communicate with lay people and explain in lay terms.
Yeah, so in other words, if you're going to say it's now a 3, not a 2, do it in a way that doesn't seed panic.
So if you're going to use Twitter to upgrade the VEI from 2 to 3, then you need to explain that it just means that there's more ash and not that it's more of a danger for the people on the ground, and you need to make sure that the people are at the centre of it.